Hello Void, it's me, Eldon, from the Eldon Archive. And as we approach the eve of the 5th, it's time to talk about 7.3 and the future of Final Fantasy XIV. Now, for the longest time, there's been one thing I've wanted to do, and that is wild and unmitigated speculation. I'm not too familiar with other FF games or the lore of 14 as a whole, however, I do fancy myself someone who knows a bit about stories, and, well, I want to work those muscles, at least a little bit. Here we'll go over what could happen, what should happen, and what might affect the story going forward. And since I'm a little late, we'll also talk about the trailer a bit to confirm our theories. Let's get into it. The first person I want to talk about is Sphene. After 7.2, Sphene has gotten a lot of praise, and I think she works really well. Her introduction to the story, while quick, brought her into the perfect position as someone who truly cares about Alexandria and speaks for its virtues and history. I don't know if I like Alexandria as a concept. Neo Alexandria is a bit lacking in grounding, and I would normally hope for such a place to be moved on from, but Sphene brings an entirely new view of the location, which I enjoy having around. Her distance through time and general apprehension of taking up her responsibilities is compelling. She also has great chemistry with the rest of the Scions, proven in 7.2's MSQ, so I'm excited to see where they'll take her. I've listened to a lot of discourse online that puts Sphene as joining the Scions. This I don't necessarily believe. Sphene seems like a classic A-tier character. Her entire story is set around her relationship with Alexandria, or perhaps Neo Alexandria. Her arc and its conflicts revolve around that connection, which pins her to me as a classic Alliance character. She's also in the story picked up a healing job specifically. Now, some might take that to mean that we're getting ready to bring her into the Scions, but for me, I have a different view. The 0.3 patch is generally when the post-expansion story comes to its climax. Nidhogg, Yotsuyu, all of these happen in the 0.3 patch, and that normally comes along with a trial inside of the patch. But since recently we've been getting trials in every patch instead of a trial series, I am led to believe that they're going to try and do something special for this particular trial. What's that special thing? Well, it's duty support. In 7.2, there's a cutscene where we sort of have a video call with all the different Scions and just check in on what they're up to. Now, there are two people that are interestingly absent from that list, Urianger and Thancred. The Scions, as they exist, are essentially a full party. We've got some tanks, some healers, and a bunch of DPS. With Urianger and Thancred missing, we're down one tank and one healer, and we just so happen to have Wuklamot along, a tank, and now Sphene, a healer. This sets us up perfectly to have 7.3 have a duty support trial. And we call into each of the Scions, even though it doesn't work that well, so that we can just establish they're in the story and get ready to have them be in the duty support trial when that comes about. This setup for her being in a duty support trial does lend me hope that we will see a great climax to her arc. We see in the trailer Sphene looking down as the Scions get sort of attacked by Calyx, and that leads me to hope we'll find some amount of like a surging moment from Sphene, where her resolve to take care of the people of Alexandria will come to its fruition. She'll get an important moment where she can claim her birthright and try and redeem Alexandria. It's something the story sorely needs, and would make a great moment for her character. Let's move on to the more interesting individual, in my mind, Calyx. Calyx was one of the highlights of 7.2, a legitimately threatening villain who seemed to actually be taking us, the Warrior of Light, seriously. While he certainly doesn't pose the same amount of threat as some of the other world-ending forces we've faced, he's intelligent and presents himself not as some overwhelming power, but as an operator trying to sabotage us. He's always testing and advancing his own schemes. To me, at least, this is a very interesting direction to take a villain, and personally, I would love for him to survive past 7.3. Post-patch villains are not necessarily long for this world. Yotsuyu and Stormblood dies tragically, and Elidibus, as soon as he takes the position, and Shadowbringers soon falls as well. I do, however, think Calyx does provide an interesting opportunity and may be able to survive past his initial introduction in the post-patch quests. Calyx's main stated goal is to overcome death through preservation. His current project, the Endless, fulfills this goal. However, they are flawed, consisting only of memories and lacking true souls. But just a few patches ago, we found a better version of the Endless, a better version of eternal life, that being the Void, a place where the Endless's nature that Calyx seeks can be found easily, if not universally. Calyx also has in his own power a path to interdimensional travel through the key. Therefore, he has a way of escaping and remaining theoretically relevant in a possible future expansion. I think this will all depend on how much Calyx is used and what type of use we find for him in 7.3. Where do his true motivations lie? The revealed dungeon for 7.3 is the Mesoterminal, a futuristic landscape that seems to shift between the past of Alexandria and the modern sort of server aesthetic. This is the perfect place to thematically explore the reckoning of Alexandria and how it turns into a deathless society. And also, hopefully, explore the backstory of Calyx and why he determined that progress is his primary objective. If we can determine Calyx's motivations, which is what I hope happens, we can see where he gets his drive and why he seeks eternal life. And that reason, whether it is linked intrinsically to Alexandria or whether it stems from something larger or connection with a larger force, is how we will determine whether or not he can stick around. If a villain is thematically relevant, 14 has a tendency not to kill them off. But once their arc is come to fruition, then they fade into the background. Calyx is still an unknown, and given time, we will be able to determine whether he is limited to Alexandria or can exist beyond. Not that one of those options is necessarily better, while I would love to see Calyx move forward. If he can provide a strong thematically relevant touch point for Alexandria, that would be much needed in the story. Now, to move on to a little bit of baseless speculation for Calyx's motivations, I imagine him to be some type of sickly child who was taken in and tutored by a mysterious, dark-masked inventor who just so happens to be an Ascian. Maybe the female voice we heard at the start of the trailer was his mentor. And while Sphene and her companions were running about and playing, he stayed inside and learned the secrets of Electrope. When his master revealed themselves to be working towards the reunification of his shard, instead of turning towards the goal of the Ascians like the Garlean Emperor before him, Calyx instead turned against it, moving towards his own goal, preservation, an exact opposite to the Ascian's stated goal. Perhaps he killed the Ascian or expunged them, taking control of his own projects and starting preservation. If this were to be true, then Calyx would be a good kind of individual to move on to the larger story. If his motivations skew less towards a specific love for Alexandria and more for a dedication to progress, then he can find a position in the future expansions. A future expansion which I very much expect to be a Void expansion for 8.0. I have a great reason for this. The only two remaining jobs that aren't as of yet taken up by a former expansion as the Warrior of Light or by a Scion are the as yet introduced tank job and Reaper. Now, I think it's very clear that we need another dedicated tank for a main character because we only really have Thancred in the Scions, and every expansion should probably have a tank NPC to fill out the new trial duty support, but I digress. Anyway, that just leaves Reaper, because you know damn well that Essie will be sent to the pits of the Void before they give us the Warrior of Light as a caster or ranged again. Additionally, we have the cycle of foreshadowing events where in the 6.x series it was all about the Void, and now that has time to sit and stew and hopefully come to fruition. Finally, we are moving towards interdimensional travel, and most of our threads for interdimensional travel eventually do lead us to the Void, be that the actual Void storyline of 6.x or the characters remaining on the first, who half of which are connected to the Void. So hopefully we get a Void expansion soon that reintroduces Reen and Gaia, maybe has new scions, and we get to go to the new plane with new people, and we leave some of the science behind. I'm digressing. Beyond this is entirely speculation with no reasons for it. It's just my own hopes and dreams. And sadly, those have proven to be not enough. Anyway, all tangents aside, back to Calix. If his true goal is as I predict, or at least as I hope, then he would make a great supporting villain for the proposed Void expansion. He could also help bridge the gap to any larger villain if he was not in fact led by Nassian but by maybe someone else, or if he perhaps meets a new wider scale multi-expansion villain in the midst of his villainy in the Void, that could also possibly lead him to sticking around for longer, maybe. Personally, I don't know. I hope the next expansion villain or multi-expansion villain is some sort of like empire or corporation intent on expanding their own domain across the multiverse. But again, it's complete speculation. I just hope Calix can move on past 7.3 after we get his backstory and all that, which is actual predictions for the events of the story. Finally, we have Alexandria as a society. 7.x patches have been largely about them and what's going on with them, how they will reckon with their lack of death and how they will be reintegrated into society as a whole. This will come home in 7.3, I have little doubt. The new regulators have been given out, the alterations of memories to reintroduce fake Sphene, all of these things and these threads, they swirl about, yet the final message is still to be seen. I imagine that our Sphene will make some move or plea to the hearts of the people to try and redeem them in our eyes as the audience. Perhaps they will reach out and remind them of death, and the people of Alexandria will rally behind and come to the conclusion that it's better to remember the dead. Hopefully we can get some communication between them and the people of Tural, and they'll reintegrate and cheer and everyone will be happy. Realistically, the people of Alexandria have always been a sore spot for me. I don't particularly care about their plights as a society, but I do think conceptually it's interesting, and I wonder how Square Enix will bring it home. A society without death is almost entirely alien to as a concept, but it's been implemented fairly well. The one issue I've seen is that it seems really hard to bring them back, and I really hope they don't hand-wave, oh, with one speech and one act of bravery, now everyone's finally okay with death. I would like to see more of this interesting stuff that we get in, say, Arcadian, where all of the warriors are used to fighting literally to the death. I think that's all super cool, and I'd love to see more of it, or at least not have it end in some sort of cookie-cutter way, but it's 14, so we'll see. What I actually hope does happen, and this is me trying to predict the future. Pre-writing, if you will. I know this comes out like a day before because I'm way lazy, but we'll get there. We pick back up, we meet up with the Scions. They're looking for Calix, or at least trying to mitigate whatever his plans are with the chaos and the random robots attacking. The people of Alexandria find themselves threatened, and calamities continue to ramp up until Calix forces our hand, maybe with an announcement, or maybe with something a little bit more devious. We eventually move into action. After a little bit of a side quest, we go up and face him at the Meso Terminal, at which point we descend down into the memories of the past. We learn about his backstory, and Calix will at some point either steal the key or Azim's soul crystal, thinking this to be the source of our ultimate power. Considering he asks us to hand over the key in the trailer, he's probably not going to be able to steal it, but it's still like a possibility that he tricks us at the last minute. He definitely gets his hand on our soul crystal though, and stops us from using it. He then confronts us with his primary form, probably like a big robot body. I doubt we'll just be fighting a weird scientist kid. I'm not a Final Fantasy guru, but I've heard people talk about Necron once, so let's go with Necron. We confront Calix and Necron, and he thinks he'll have the upper hand since we lack Azim's soul gem, but we use the power of friendship, and I think there was an Electrope summoning circle, so maybe we use that to bring all the Scions to our side and hit him where it hurts with a duty support trial. In the trial, Sphene and Wu Clement have their moments, and they shine, refuting Calix's ideology of endless and anti-death, and they stop him. We all cheer and scream, and the whole shindig goes good, and we all go home and celebrate. You know, classic 14 stuff. My hope is that at this point we see Calix has escaped, perhaps stealing the key in the midst of the fight, as he never really cared about win or lose. He was never fighting for the spirit of Alexandria, but for his own vision of progress. And being willing to sacrifice all of Alexandria to achieve it also means he's willing to sacrifice rule of the place, and instead abandon it and move on to somewhere else. He takes the key, travels away, leaving Alexandria behind in the hands of Sphene. We reunite, large celebration, probably talk with all the Scions, and eventually Y'shtola figures out a new way for interdimensional travel, one that isn't dimensional fusion, which, I'm not gonna lie, is still kind of confusing and probably really hard to implement. It makes sense from the point of altering the terrain and the initial expansion, but going forward is probably not the best way to handle all interdimensional travel. I digress. We find the path to interdimensional travel, which leads us to 7.4, where we go back to the first and start solving the new mysteries that appear now that we can traverse the different shards at our will. And then we reunite with Green and Gaia, and we have all these big moments in the first. It's all so wonderful. This is copium. Regardless, 7.3 will end with Alexandria moving forward and Sphene taking her rightful place atop the society, cementing herself as an A-list Alliance character. There it is, my vision for the future of 14. Probably mostly speculation, not necessarily unexpected, but hopefully I get some of it right. I hope Calix lives. I don't know, we've been starved for interesting villains, and Calix has presented such a unique experience from the little we've seen of him, and I would hate for his endeavors to end in 7.3 with just 2 patches. I don't imagine we'll be seeing much more of Sphene as a Scion. I mean, technically it's possible if she refuses to take the throne. I mean, we could put Shale on the throne. I like Shale, I think her voice is really cool. I'd love for her to sort of get her moment in the sun, and then Sphene can stay with us because Sphene is objectively cooler, but realistically that's not going to happen. Anyway, I guess we can only wait and see. But it's like tomorrow, so I mean, we're not gonna have to wait that long, and probably like no one's gonna watch the video when it comes out before the actual patch comes out. So just know that I made this before everything happened. Anyway, take it easy. Bye bye. Elden out.